When four cartel enforcers hunt down Sheriff Mike Colson in the sleepy backwoods of Pine Creek, they expect small-town law enforcement, untested and outmatched. What they don't see beneath his unassuming smile are the trident scars of Bud-S training and combat deployments that haunt his dreams. As night falls on the isolated county station, the killers are about to discover a brutal truth. They've cornered a wolf who spent years hunting far deadlier predators. And unlike the SEALs, this sheriff doesn't need to follow rules of engagement. But before we jump back into the video, let us know where you're watching from. And if you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe because I have something really special for you tomorrow. And now, back to the video. The radio crackled with static in the empty station. Pine Creek Sheriff's Department, a converted general store from the 1950s, stood alone at the edge of town. Rain hammered against the windows, the drumming almost drowning out the sound of tires, crunching over gravel outside. Sheriff Mike Colson's hand froze over his coffee mug. His weathered face remained calm, but his eyes, hard as flint, flickered toward the security monitor. The grainy feed showed a black SUV with its lights off, pulling, alongside three others already parked in the shadows. "Dispatch, this is Colson. You copy." His voice was steady, betraying nothing of the adrenaline now coursing through his system. Silence. The phones were already dead. Cell service in Pine Creek was spotty on good days. During storms like this, it was non-existent. Mike's fingers brushed against the scar on his forearm. A habit from another life. 8 years as a Navy SEAL had taught him to recognize the feeling settling in his gut. The calm before violence. 4 men emerged from the vehicles, their movements precise and coordinated. Not local troublemakers, not even state-level professionals. The way they positioned themselves, creating overlapping fields of fire, these were cartel soldiers. The lead man's face caught the security light for just a moment. A jagged scar ran from eye to jaw. Mike's blood went cold. He knew that face. Ramirez, the butcher of Juarez. 3 months ago, Pine Creek deputies had intercepted a shipment moving north. 2 million in product. 4 couriers now sitting in federal custody. Mike had testified last week, identifying key players in the Salazar cartel. Now they'd come to send a message. The sheriff moved deliberately to his desk, unlocking the bottom drawer. Inside wasn't the standard issue Glock 22 most sheriffs carried. It was a custom Sig Sauer P226, the same model he'd carried through 3 combat deployments. Beside it lay a worn, smooth challenge coin. Team 3, 2nd Platoon. "Never thought I'd need you again," he whispered, loading the weapon with practiced efficiency. Through the window, lightning illuminated the parking lot. The men were spreading out, approaching from multiple angles. One carried what looked like a battering ram. They expected to find a small-town sheriff, a man with a badge, a gun, and jurisdiction that ended at the county line. What they would find instead was something else entirely. Mike Colson switched off the lights. In the sudden darkness, his eyes adjusted rapidly, a skill honed in compounds and caves halfway around the world. He removed his badge, placing it deliberately on the desk. For years, he'd fought to bury the man he'd been, the one who moved through hostile territory like a ghost, the one who'd left pieces of himself in faraway deserts. Tonight, that man would return. The first crash against the front door echoed through the building. Mike closed his eyes for just a moment, allowing himself one deep breath. When he opened them again, Sheriff Colson was gone, and the SEAL had returned. 6 months earlier, the sun rose over Pine Creek, casting long shadows across Main Street, a town of 4,200 souls nestled in the foothills, where everyone knew everyone and strangers stood out like neon signs. Mike Colson sipped coffee from the steps of the sheriff's department, nodding at familiar faces driving past. 3 years in this town, and the quiet still felt foreign. No explosions, no gunfire, just the occasional domestic dispute and teenagers joyriding down country roads. "Morning, Sheriff," called Martha from the diner across the street. "Usual breakfast?" "You know it," Mike replied with an easy smile that never quite reached his eyes. Inside, Deputy Sarah Chen organized case files at her desk. Young, ambitious, and sharp as a tack, she transferred from Dallas PD for reasons Mike never pressed her about. Everyone in Pine Creek had something they were running from or toward. "Morning, boss." 4 DUIs from the weekend and Hank Thompson's son shoplifted again at Miller's. Mike nodded, hanging his hat. Teenagers. Get his dad on the phone. I'll talk. To him. Already did. He's coming by at noon. Sarah hesitated. Also, there's a letter from the U.S. Attorney's Office, marked urgent. Mike's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly as he took the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper requesting his testimony in the case of United States versus Luis Salazar. Et al. Everything okay? Sarah asked, noticing his change in demeanor. Fine, Mike said, folding the letter. Just bureaucracy. The truth was more complicated. The Salazar bust had been luck. Deputies Jesse and Rodrigo stopping a suspicious van for a broken taillight. The discovery of 40 kilos and 4 cartel couriers had thrust Pine Creek into a federal investigation that stretched from Mexico to Chicago. In his office, Mike stared at the photo on his desk. A younger version of himself in desert camo, arm slung around his best friend Dave Martinez, both grinning despite the dust and danger. Dave's body had returned home in a flag-draped coffin 6 months later. The phone rang, pulling him back to the present. Sheriff Colson. Mike, it's Jeff Wilson. The mayor's voice was strained. We need to talk about this cartel business. My office. 20 minutes. Mike hung up and gazed out the window at his quiet town. He'd chosen Pine Creek after leaving the Navy because nothing happened here, because he could be anonymous, because the nightmares might eventually stop. Now the past was circling back, like it always did. Mayor Wilson arrived, looking like he hadn't slept in days, his normally immaculate suit wrinkled at the elbows. The DEA called me, he said, without preamble. They're setting up a task force, want to use our station as a base of operations. Mike leaned back. It's a good idea. This is bigger than us. Is it? Wilson's eyes narrowed. Because I heard some interesting things about you, about why you might understand these cartels better than most small-town sheriffs. The room went silent. Mike had never discussed his military background with anyone in Pine Creek beyond the basics. Navy veteran, honorable discharge. The details, the operations, the targets, the things he'd seen and done. Those stayed locked away. My past isn't relevant, Mike said evenly. It is when my town is potentially in the crosshairs of the Salazar cartel. Wilson loosened his tie. Look, I'm not asking for war stories, but I need to know. Can you handle this? Really handle it? Mike studied the mayor. Wilson was a politician through and through, but he cared about Pine Creek. Yes, Mike said finally. I can handle it. After Wilson left, Mike unlocked his desk drawer and removed a worn leather journal. Inside were names and dates, operations in places that didn't officially exist, men who'd died under his command. A coded shorthand only he understood. He flipped to a page marked with a red tab. Operación Fantasma. 6 years ago. Joint DEA SEAL operation. Targeting the Salazar cartel's leadership structure. Mike's team had been the muscle, eliminating security forces, while DEA extracted high-value targets. The mission details remained classified, but one name stood out on the page. Marco Ramirez, head of security. Status: wounded, escaped. The man had killed 2 of Mike's teammates before taking a bullet himself and disappearing into the Mexican countryside. Now the ghost of that mission was about to collide with his carefully constructed new life. Sheriff! Sarah stood in the doorway. Jesse and Rodrigo are back from patrol, and that boy they arrested last month during the drug bust, his mother's here, says she has information. Mike closed the journal. Send her in. Elena Vasquez entered, clutching her purse like a shield. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. Sheriff, thank you for seeing me. Have a seat, Mrs. Vasquez. How's Miguel doing? He's scared. The public defender says with cooperation, maybe 5 years instead of 20. Her voice cracked. He was stupid, but he's not a bad boy. Just got caught up with bad people. Mike nodded. He'd seen it before. Young men seduced by fast money and faster lives, never understanding the true cost until too late. What can I do for you? Elena reached into her purse and withdrew a folded paper. Miguel sent this from jail. Names, dates, where the shipments come through. He says, she faltered. He says if they find out he told, they'll kill him. Kill us all. Mike took the paper. I'll make sure the federal prosecutor knows his cooperation. We can arrange protection. No. Eleanor stood abruptly. No more police, no more courts. Just use this to stop them. Then forget Myson's name. After she left, Mike studied the information. If accurate, it detailed the entire northern distribution chain of the Salazar cartel's operation, including one critical piece: a major shipment scheduled for next week, passing straight through Pine Creek County. Mike picked up the phone and dialed a number few people knew existed. "Marshal," a gruff voice answered. "It's Colson." A pause. "Been a long time, Chief. I need your help." Unofficial. His former commanding officer's voice softened. "Talk to me." As Mike outlined the situation, thunder rumbled in the distance. A summer storm was moving in from the mountains. By the time he hung up, rain had started to fall. Sarah knocked on his doorframe. "Everything all right? You've been in here for hours." Mike realized the office had grown dark. "Just fine. Head home, Sarah. Storm's coming in." After she left, Mike remained at his desk, staring at the rain-streaked window. Behind him on the wall hung a map of Pine Creek County. 3,000 square miles of forests, farms, and winding back roads. His jurisdiction, his responsibility. He traced a finger along Highway 14, the route Miguel's information identified for the upcoming shipment. Remote and unpatrolled at night, it was the perfect corridor. The DEA wouldn't arrive for days. Waiting wasn't an option. Mike pulled out his phone and sent a text message to his 3 deputies. "Meeting tomorrow, 0700. Mandatory." Then he drove home through the rain to his cabin at the edge of Sawyer Lake. Inside, past the sparse furniture and bare walls, he unlocked a hidden panel behind the bedroom closet. The cache contained items from another life, specialized equipment, weapons that weren't standard for any sheriff's department, a passport with a different name, things he'd promised himself he'd never need again. Mike ran his fingers over the trident insignia on a metal box. Inside lay his most closely guarded secret, the record of what really happened during Operación Fantasma, the mission that had gone terribly wrong. The real reason he'd left the teams. Thunder crashed outside as he closed the panel without opening the box. Some ghosts were better left undisturbed. He didn't know that in 6 months' time, those ghosts would come hunting him, forcing him to become the man he'd tried so hard to leave behind. The morning briefing started at 0700 sharp. Mike's 3 deputies, Sarah Chen, Jesse Holt, and Rodrigo Sanchez, sat in the conference room, steam rising from coffee cups as rain continued to drum against the windows. 2 days ago, I received information about a major shipment coming through our county. Mike pointed to AMAPs spread across the table. Highway 14, near the old Miller property. Thursday night, approximately 0200 hours. Jesse whistled. "That's serious cartel territory. The same guys from the bus last month." "Yes, Salazar organization." Mike's tone was flat, clinical. "DEA is forming a task force, but they won't be operational in time. This falls to us." Rodrigo shifted uncomfortably. "Sheriff, with all due respect, we're talking about heavily armed cartel soldiers. The 4 of us against how many?" "Intel suggests 6 to 8. 2 vehicles." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "You didn't answer the question. How are the 4 of us supposed to handle this?" Mike met her gaze. "We're not going in blind. I've arranged for specialized equipment and tactical support." "From who?" Jesse demanded. "State police won't touch this without a week of paperwork. Let me worry about that." Mike straightened. "I need to know if you're in. This is strictly voluntary. You say no, no hard feelings." The room fell silent. These weren't hardened tactical officers, but small-town deputies. Good people who wrote traffic tickets and helped find lost dogs. Finally, Sarah spoke. "If we don't stop this shipment, how many kids like Miguel end up hooked?" "I'm in." Jesse nodded. "Me too." Rodrigo hesitated longer. "My wife is pregnant." "I know," Mike said softly. "Stay behind, coordinate from dispatch." "No." Rodrigo squared his shoulders. "My kid's going to grow up. In this town I'm in." Mike felt a familiar weight settle onto his shoulders. The burden of command, of leading others into danger. "Then we prepare. Starting now." Over the next 3 days, Mike transformed his deputies. Using the department's rarely visited shooting range, he ran drills that went far beyond standard police training. Combat movement, tactical communication, weapon handling techniques that weren't taught at any police academy. "Where did you learn all this?" Sarah asked on the second day. reloading her weapon with newfound efficiency. Mike paused. Previous life. Military? When he didn't answer, she pressed. Marines? A ghost of a smile. Something like that. By Thursday afternoon, the plan was set. 2 vehicles positioned at strategic points along Highway 14. Mike and Sarah in one, Jesse and Rodrigo in the other. Unmarked cars, no uniforms. The shipment would be stopped before it ever reached Pine Creek. At sundown, they gathered one last time. Mike distributed heavy tactical vests, not standard department issue. These are rated for rifle rounds, Jesse observed, examining his. Where'd you get them? Friend owed me a favor. Mike checked his watch. Positions by 2300. Radio silence. Except emergencies. Questions? There were none. As they dispersed to prepare, Mike felt a presence behind him. Sarah stood in the doorway, arms folded. I ran your name through some databases, she said quietly. Nothing special came up, but there's a gap. 4 years where you basically don't exist. Mike went still. You shouldn't have done that. Maybe not, but we're about to go up against Cartel hitmen. I need to know who's leading us. Her eyes searched his. What are you not telling us, Sheriff? For a moment, Mike considered continuing the deception. Then he reached into his pocket and withdrew a battered metal trident. Navy SEAL. 8 years, 3 combat deployments. He placed the trident on the table between them. That's who's leading you tonight. Sarah's eyes widened. Jesus, does the mayor know? No one knows, and I'd like to keep it that way. Why hide it? Most guys can't wait to tell you they were special forces. Mike's jaw tightened. Because the man who did those things, he doesn't belong here, in Pine Creek. Here, claimed the trident. He doesn't deserve the peace. Before Sarah could respond, Mike's phone rang. The screen showed a Virginia area code. Colson. It's Marshall. We have a problem. Mike turned away from Sarah. Talk to me. The information was compromised. Someone talked. Mike's blood went cold. How bad? They're changing the route, and they know someone's waiting. When? Unknown, but they're sending cleaners. Professional hit team. Mike closed his eyes. The woman who brought us the intel. Her son, already dead. Killed in his cell this morning. Made to look like suicide. The walls seemed to close in. And the mother? Silence on the line. Understood. Mike's voice had changed, hardened. We abort. The highway operation. Tell your people Tustin down. After hanging up, he turned to find Sarah still watching him. What's happening? She asked. Operation's blown. They know someone talked. He grabbed his jacket. I need to check on someone. Tell Jesse and Rodrigo to stand down and stay at the station tonight. All of you. What about you? Mike was already heading for the door. Do as I say, Deputy. The drive to Elena Vasquez's apartment took 12 minutes. Mike knew it was already too late when he saw the door slightly ajar. Hand on his weapon, he entered to find the small living room destroyed, furniture overturned, pictures smashed, and blood. Too much blood. Elena lay in the kitchen, her body positioned with deliberate cruelty. A message to informants. Mike checked for a pulse, knowing he wouldn't find one. Her skin was still warm. He'd missed them by minutes. A sound, almost imperceptible, came from behind the pantry door. Mike drew his weapon in one fluid motion. Come out. Slowly. The door cracked open to reveal the terrified face of a young girl. Eleanor's daughter, Maria. No more than 12 years old. She was shaking uncontrollably, tears streaming silently down her face. Maria. Mike holstered his weapon and knelt. Did you see them? The men who did this? She nodded, frozen in shock. How many? She held up 4 fingers. Are they gone? Another nod. I'm going to get you somewhere safe. He reached for her, but she recoiled. Maria, I'm Sheriff Colson. Your mother trusted me. I need you to trust me too. Her eyes darted to her mother's body, then back to Mike. Finally, she took his outstretched hand. As Mike led her to his car, the rain intensified, washing the blood from his hands, but not from his conscience. Elena had trusted him with information that got her killed. Now her daughter was orphaned and in danger. His phone rang again as they reached the car. Sarah's name flashed on the screen. Chen, what is it? Someone's been watching the station. Her voice was tense, controlled. Black SUV, tinted windows. When Rodrigo went to check it out, they drove off fast. Locked down the station. No one in or out. Already done. Where are you? Mike glanced at Maria, huddled in his passenger seat. Taking care of something. I'll be there soon. He ended the call and started driving. Not toward the station, but to his cabin on the lake. The safe house protocols he'd learned years ago kicked in automatically. Never go to the expected location. Assume all official channels are compromised. At the cabin, he secured the perimeter before bringing Maria inside. The girl hadn't spoken a word, her eyes vacant with trauma. You'll be safe here, Mike told her, setting up the couch with blankets and pillows. I need to help my deputies, but I'll be back. The doors are locked, and no one knows about this place. She finally spoke, her voice barely audible. They'll kill you too. Mike paused. No, they won't. You didn't see them. Her voice shook. The one with a scar, he enjoyed it. Made Mama suffer. Said he was sending a message to you. The scar. Ramirez. Mike's hands clenched involuntarily. What else did he say? That after they killed you, they'd find me. Mike knelt before her. Maria, look at me. He waited until her eyes met his. I won't let that happen. Those men, they don't know who they're dealing with. You're just a sheriff. For a moment, Mike considered what to say. Then he rolled up his sleeve to reveal a faded tattoo, the seal trident, intertwined with a skull. Before I came to Pine Creek, I hunted men like them. All over the world, men much worse, much more dangerous. His voice was gentle but carried absolute certainty. They think they're coming for an easy target. They're wrong. He secured the cabin, leaving Maria with emergency supplies, a secure satellite phone, and clear instructions. Then he drove toward the station, his mind already shifting to a combat mindset he hadn't accessed in years. The cartel had made 3 critical mistakes. They'd killed Elena, threatened her daughter, and targeted his deputies. But their biggest mistake was assuming. He was just a small-town sheriff who would be easily overwhelmed. They were about to learn differently. As he drove through the storm-lashed night, Mike made a call to a number only a handful of people in the world knew existed. Ghost Actual, answered a voice that belonged to a man who officially didn't exist. Nighthawk. Mike used his old call sign. I'm calling in that favor. Lightning split the sky as the pieces of a plan formed in his mind. By morning, 4 cartel hitmen would be hunting him. They didn't realize they were about to become the hunted. The sheriff's station was dark when Mike arrived, only emergency lights casting shadows across empty desks. He found his deputies in the conference room, weapons ready, blinds drawn. Report, Mike said, closing the door behind him. 2 more drive-bys since I called, Sarah said. Same vehicle. They're looking for weaknesses. Jesse paced nervously. Sheriff, what the hell is going on? First the stakeout gets blown, now we've Gotha-styles circling the station. They're here for me. Mike's voice was calm, controlled. The Vasquez woman who brought us the intel is dead. Killed by cartel hitmen. 4 of them, led by a man named Ramirez. Jesus Christ, Rodrigo whispered. And her son? Also dead. Prison suicide. Mike's mouth tightened. This isn't a normal cartel operation anymore. It's personal. Sarah studied him. Because of your testimony? Partly. Mike hesitated, then decided they deserved the full truth. 6 years ago, I was part of a joint operation targeting the Salazar cartel. One of their key lieutenants escaped, a man named Marco Ramirez. He's the one leading the hit team. Wait, Jesse interrupted. What operation? You were a sheriff in Colorado before here. That was my cover. Mike met their shocked expressions steadily. I was a Navy SEAL, specialized in counter-narcotics operations. The revelation landed like a bomb in the small room. His deputies exchanged glances, processing this new information about the man they thought they knew. So, that's why you've been training us like we're going to war, Rodrigo said slowly. Because we are. Mike spread a county map across the table. They'll come for me first. Try to isolate me. Standard cartel tactic is to eliminate the leadership, then pick off the rest one by one. So what's the plan? Sarah asked, the first to recover. Call in the feds. Phones are down. Cell service too. Mike checked his watch. They're jamming communications. By the time help arrives, we'll be dead. Then we run, Jesse suggested. Get out while we can. Mike shook his head. They've got vehicles stationed on all roads out of town. I spotted them on my way in. Besides, if we leave, they'll just move on to soft targets. Families, witnesses, civilians. Eleanor's daughter is already hiding, but they'll find others to hurt. You said 4 men, Sarah noted. We're 4 as well. Armed, on home territory. These aren't street thugs, Mike warned. They're trained killers, former military most likely. So are you, Rodrigo pointed out. And you've trained us. Mike felt a swell of pride in his team, even as he recognized the danger they were in. I have a plan, but I need to know you're with me. This goes beyond the badge now. One by one, they nodded. All right. Mike outlined his strategy, pointing to locations on the map. They expect us to stay defensive, holed up in here. Instead, we split up, make them divide their forces. Divide and conquer, Sarah murmured. Exactly. I'll draw the main force. Ramirez will want me personally. Each of you takes a position, here, here, and here. He marked locations that formed a rough triangle around the town center. If they come for you, retreat to these fallback positions. We stay mobile, use the town to our advantage. Jesse frowned. What about civilians? We can't have a gunfight on Main Street. Town's mostly empty with the storm, but you're right. Mike thought for a moment. Rodrigo, contact Mayor Wilson. Quiet evacuation of the central blocks. Tell him there's a gas leak or something. And weapons? Sarah asked. Mike went to a storage closet and unlocked it with a key. Only he possessed. Inside were tactical gear and weapons that had never been part of any official inventory. SEAL care package, he explained, distributing equipment. Called in a favor. For the next hour they prepared. Mike taught them hand signals and tactical maneuvers, simplified versions of what he'd learned in the teams. Watching them absorb the training with determined focus, he felt a familiar sensation. Not quite dread, not quite excitement. The clarity of impending combat. Communications? Rodrigo asked, checking his weapon. Mike distributed small earpieces. Short-range tactical, frequency hopping so they can't jam them easily. Keep transmissions brief. As they geared up, Sarah approached him privately. You knew this might happen, didn't you? That's why you've been training us differently since that highway bust. Mike nodded. I hoped it wouldn't. Thought testifying might be enough, that they'd focus on bigger problems than a small-town sheriff. But you prepared anyway. Old habits. Mike checked his sidearm one last time. When I joined the SEALs, my first commander told me something I never forgot. Hope for sunshine, pack for rain. Always prepare for the worst outcome. And what's the worst outcome here? Sarah asked quietly. Mike met her eyes. That I can't keep you all alive. The confession hung between them. Before Sarah could respond, the lights went out completely. Emergency power failed a moment later. They were in total darkness. They've cut the power, Mike said, his voice shifting to a clipped, authoritative tone. Positions now. Remember your training. His deputies moved with calm efficiency, muscle memory from their drills taking over. Mike felt a surge of pride, even as worry gnawed at him. They were good people, brave, dedicated, but they weren't warfighters. As they prepared to separate, Mike addressed them one last time. These men are here because of me, because of my past. I'm sorry I brought this to your door. With respect, Sheriff, Rodrigo said, they're here because we did our jobs. Stopped their shipment, testified against them. That's on all of us. Jesse nodded. We're officers of the law. This is what we signed up for. Maybe not exactly this, Sarah added with a tight smile. But the principle stands. Mike looked at his team. No longer just deputies, but something more. Stay alive. That's an order. They moved out into the storm-swept night, separating to their assigned positions. Mike headed for the courthouse. High ground, good sight lines, multiple exit routes, the kind of position he would have chosen in his SEAL days. Lightning illuminated the empty streets as he moved from shadow to shadow. The tactical awareness he'd suppressed for years resurfaced instinctively. Every sound registered. Every movement, in his peripheral vision, triggered instant evaluation. His radio crackled softly. Position 1 secure, came Sarah's voice. Position 2 secure, Jesse reported. Position 3 secure, Rodrigo confirmed. Command in position, Mike responded. Radio silence unless contact made. From his vantage point in the courthouse bell tower, Mike scanned the town through a night vision monocular. The streets glistened with rain, deserted except for, there, movement at the edge of town. 2 SUVs moving slowly, lights off. Contact, Mike whispered into his radio. Main Street approach, 2 vehicles, at least 4 tangos. He watched as the vehicles separated, one heading toward the sheriff's station, the other circling toward their residential area where Sarah was positioned. Chen, vehicle approaching your position, stay hidden. Copy, came the terse reply. The next 20 minutes were tense silence. Mike tracked the vehicles through the town, noting their search pattern. They were thorough, professional, not rushing, in with guns blazing, but methodically clearing sectors. A burst of static, then Sarah's urgent whisper. 2 men, on foot, approaching the library. Can you evade? Negative. They're between me and the exit. Mike's mind raced through options. Hold position. Do not engage unless discovered. Copy. Her transmission cut off abruptly. Mike tensed. Chen, report. Silence. Then gunfire erupted from the direction of the library, sharp cracks that echoed across the empty town. Position 2 moving to assist. Jesse's voice broke protocol. Negative. Mike ordered. Maintain position. It's what they want. More gunfire, then Sarah's breathless voice. 1 down, 1 pursuing, moving to fallback position. Mike's training clicked in. Rodrigo, create a diversion. East side of town. Draw attention. Away from Chen. Copy. Seconds later, a loud explosion rocked the quiet town. Rodrigo had detonated one of the flashbangs from Mike's equipment cache. Through his monocular, Mike saw the second SUV turn abruptly, heading toward the explosion. The trap was working, dividing their forces, creating confusion, but it wouldn't last long. These were professionals. They'd adapt quickly. Mike keyed his radio. All units, Phase 2, converge on the final position. It was time to turn the hunters into the hunted. He descended from the bell tower quickly, moving through the darkened courthouse with practiced silence. Outside, rain continued to fall, masking his footsteps as he made his way toward their predetermined rallying point, the old lumber mill at the edge of town. As he moved, Mike thought of Maria, hidden away in his cabin, of Elena, murdered for helping them, of the peaceful life he'd built in Pine Creek, now shattered by violence. For 3 years, he'd played the role of small-town sheriff, convinced himself he'd left the warrior behind. Tonight had proven otherwise. The skills, the instincts, the cold calculation of combat, they'd returned instantly, like they'd never left. Maybe they never had. A figure appeared ahead, moving fast through the shadows. Mike raised his weapon, then lowered it as he recognized Sarah's movement pattern. Status? He asked when she reached him. Clean shot. Her voice was steady despite the adrenaline. He never saw it coming. The other one is wounded. Arm or shoulder couldn't tell. Good work, Jesse and Rodrigo. Already at the mill. They moved together toward the rallying point, communicating with hand signals rather than radio. The cartel men would be scanning frequencies, even encrypted ones. The old lumber mill stood dark against the stormy sky, abandoned years ago when the timber industry left Pine Creek. Its cavernous interior offered multiple defensive positions and escape routes, exactly why Mike had chosen it. Inside, they found Jesse and Rodrigo waiting. Jesse had a cut above his eye but was otherwise unharmed. Rodrigo's expression was grimmer than before. They're not just hitmen, he reported quietly. I got close enough to hear them talking. One of them mentioned clearing the town, house by house, if necessary. Mike's blood ran cold. They're looking for Maria. Who's Maria? Jesse asked. Elena Vasquez's daughter, witnessed her mother's murder, now in hiding. Mike checked his watch. We've eliminated one, wounded another. That leaves at least 2, including Ramirez. So what's the plan? Sarah asked. We can't just wait for them to find us. We don't. Mike's voice hardened. They still think they're hunting us. Time to show them how wrong they're. For the first time since the cartel men had arrived in Pine Creek, Mike allowed himself to fully embrace the mindset he'd developed over years of combat operations, the calculated ruthlessness, the tactical precision, the absolute focus on the mission. I'm going to end this, he told his deputies. Tonight. Sarah recognized the change in him immediately. What do you need from us? Create a perimeter. Anyone approaches who isn't me, shoot to kill. He began checking his equipment methodically. If I'm not back by dawn, get to the highway and flag down help." "You're going after them alone?" Jesse asked incredulously. "It's me they want," Mike replied, his voice devoid of emotion. "And hunting alone is what I do best." Rodrigo looked skeptical. "With respect, Sheriff, that's crazy. These guys aren't the worst I've faced," Mike cut him off. "Not even close." He removed his sheriff's badge, placing it on a workbench. The symbolism wasn't lost on his deputies. Thelorman was being set aside. Something else, someone else, was taking his place. "Keep this safe for me," he told Sarah. Then, to all of them, "Whatever happens, remember your oath. Protect the innocent. That's what matters." Without waiting for a response, Mike melted into the shadows, leaving his deputies exchanging worried glances. Behind him, outside, in the cover of darkness and rain, Mike Colson disappeared. And the SEAL the Navy had once called Nighthawk began to hunt. Rain streamed down Mike's face as he moved through Pine Creek's darkened streets. Each step was deliberate, soundless, despite the waterlogged ground. He'd removed his tactical gear, too bulky, too obvious. Now he wore only dark clothing, a knife, and his sidearm. The cartel men would be expecting body armor, tactical equipment. They wouldn't be looking for a ghost. Mike paused at an intersection, listening. The jamming equipment they were using would be nearby, probably in one of their vehicles. Finding it would be key to restoring communications with the outside world. Flicker of movement caught his eye, a shadow passing between buildings 2 blocks away. Mike sank deeper into the doorway where he'd taken cover, becoming part of the darkness. 2 men emerged onto Main Street, moving with military precision. One limped slightly, the man Sarah had wounded. The other was shorter, stockier, carrying what looked like a modified assault rifle. Not Ramirez. Where was he? The men spoke in hushed Spanish, their words mostly carried away by the storm. But Mike caught fragments, enough to understand they were regrouping at the town hall. The injured man was angry, demanding revenge for their fallen comrade. Once they passed, Mike followed. Not directly behind them, that was amateur. Instead, he paralleled their route, moving through alleys and between buildings, always keeping them in his peripheral vision without exposing himself. Town Hall was Pine Creek's largest building, a colonial-style structure with white columns and broad steps. In daylight, it projected small-town American charm. Tonight, with rain lashing its windows and lightning occasionally illuminating its facade, it looked ominous. The men entered through a side door, leaving it unlocked behind them. Sloppy, overconfident. Mike counted to 100 before approaching, using the time to scan surrounding buildings for lookouts or snipers. Nothing, just the storm and empty streets. Inside, Mike moved like a shadow. Years of CQB, close-quarters battle, training guiding every step. The wood floors that would normally creak under weight remained silent beneath his careful tread. He regulated his breathing, slow, controlled, silent. Voices echoed from the main chamber, the town council room. Mike positioned himself outside, back to the wall, listening. "Wasting time." The voice was angry, heavily accented. "We should burn this whole town." Patience. This voice was different, calmer, educated. "Colson won't abandon his people. He'll come to us." Ramirez. Mike would recognize that voice anywhere. 6 years hadn't changed it. He's already killed. "Diego," the first voice protested. "And Emilio is bleeding like a stuck pig." "Because you were careless," Ramirez replied coldly. "Underestimating him. I told you what he is." "A sheriff," scoffed a third voice. "With toy deputies." "No." Ramirez's tone hardened. "Before he hid in this backwater, he was Ghost Team, Special Operations, Thieman who hit our compound in Sinaloa." A silence fell over the room. Mike tensed. Ramirez knew exactly who he was dealing with. "The girl is the key," Ramirez continued. "Find her, and Colson will come to us. Search every house if necessary." Mike's jaw tightened. They were still hunting Maria. Time was running out. He assessed his options. 3 men in the room, possibly armed with automatic weapons. Direct confrontation was suicide, but if he could separate them... An idea formed in his mind. Dangerous, but potentially effective. He retreated silently, making his way to the building's electrical panel in the basement. Years of serving as sheriff had familiarized him with every public building in town. The panel was old but simple. Mike located the circuit for the council chamber and positioned his hand over the switch. Then he sent a text message to the secure satellite phone he'd left with Maria. Stay hidden almost. Over. Taking a deep breath, he flipped the switch. Upstairs, the council chamber plunged into darkness. Confused shouts erupted immediately. "Check the breaker!" Ramirez ordered. Mike waited in the shadows near the basement stairs. Footsteps approached. Just one set. Perfect. The cartel man descended carelessly, flashlight beam bouncing across the walls. Mike let him get halfway down before making his move. The attack was swift, silent. One hand over the mouth, the other driving his knife between ribs with surgical precision. The man didn't even have time to struggle before Mike lowered him quietly to the floor. Two left. Mike took the dead man's radio and flashlight, then ascended the stairs. The main floor was now eerily quiet. They'd realized something was wrong. "Eduardo," Ramirez called out. "Report." Mike remained silent, moving through the darkness toward the council chamber. Inside, he could make out two shapes, one by the windows, the other behind the council bench. "He's here," Ramirez said quietly, not to Mike, but to his remaining man. "Remember Juarez. No mercy." The wounded man raised his weapon, scanning the room. Mike calculated angles, distances. The man was favoring his right side where Sarah had shot him. A weakness. Mike fired twice, quick, controlled shots that found their target. The wounded cartel man dropped without a sound. One left, the most dangerous one. "Impressive, Chief." Ramirez's voice came from the darkness, using Mike's old SEAL rank. "Still the ghost." "It's over, Ramirez," Mike responded, moving positions immediately after speaking. "Your men are dead or dying." A chuckle. "Is that what you told yourself in Mexico? That it was over?" Ramirez moved too, his voice coming from a different location. "Yet, here we are." That operation was government-sanctioned. Mike kept his voice even, controlled. "And this?" Ramirez's voice shifted again. "Hunting men through the dark. This is personal, no? For Elena Vasquez, for her boy, for them," Mike agreed, moving silently toward where he'd last heard Ramirez. "And for every kid in this town who might get hooked on what you're selling." Another laugh. "The hero. Always the hero. Tell me, does Pine Creek know what you did in Colombia? In Yemen?" Mike didn't answer. Ramirez was trying to distract him, to make him emotional. "It was working. I read your file," Ramirez continued. "After Sinaloa, very impressive, very bloody." A floorboard creaked to Mike's left. The slightest sound, but enough. He fired toward the noise, then rolled to a new position. A burst of automatic fire shredded the space he'd just occupied. Ramirez was using the muzzle flash to target him. A veteran's tactic. "You missed," Ramirez taunted. "Losing your touch, Ghost." Mike regulated his breathing, pushing down the anger, the memories. This wasn't about the past. It was about now. About Pine Creek. About Maria. Another board creaked. Mike held his fire this time, recognizing the feint. Instead, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small metal canister, a flashbang from his equipment cache. Insurance. "What happened in Sinaloa was war," Mike said, projecting his voice away from his actual position. "This is murder. Elena was a civilian. Her son was a kid who made a mistake." "Loose ends," Ramirez replied dismissively. "Business." "No," Mike disagreed, slowly removing the pin from the flashbang. "This is business." He threw the device toward Ramirez's last known position and covered his ears. The explosion was deafening, the flash blinding even with eyes closed. Mike moved, immediately, charging toward where Ramirez should be. He found him staggering, disoriented, weapon still in hand, but pointed at the floor. One savage strike knocked the gun away. Another drove Ramirez to his knees. Mike placed his sidearm against the cartel man's temple. "Do it!" Ramirez hissed, blood trickling from his nose from the concussive blast. "Finish what you started in Sinaloa." Mike's finger tightened on the trigger. It would be easy, just. After what Ramirez had done to Elena, to Herson, to who knew, how many others over the years. An image flashed in Mike's mind. His badge, left behind at the lumber mill. The oath he'd taken as sheriff. The life he'd built in Pine Creek. "No," Mike said finally. "You don't get to die quick." He struck Ramirez with the butt of his pistol, knocking him unconscious. 20 minutes later, Mike used Ramirez's radio to contact the state police. With the jamming equipment disabled, communications were restored. He reported multiple homicides, officer-involved shootings, and the capture of a high-value cartel operative. Then he radioed his deputies. "Sheriff." Sarah's voice was tense. "Status?" "Clear," Mike replied. "Threat neutralized. Return to the station." "All of them?" "All of them." The relief in her voice was palpable. "Roger that. Are you okay?" Mike looked at Ramirez, now securely bound to a chair, still unconscious. "I'm fine, just doing my job." After signing off, Mike sat across from his captive, waiting for him to wake up. The storm was beginning to ease outside, first light only hours away. Had it only been one night, it felt longer, like he'd lived a lifetime in these dark hours. Ramirez stirred, eyes focusing slowly. When he registered his situation, he smiled coldly. "So, not the killer you once were." "I'm something else now," Mike replied. "A sheriff." Ramirez spat the word. "Playing pretend in this nothing town." "Maybe," Mike conceded. "Or maybe this is who I always was. The other thing, that was the pretending." Ramirez studied him with clinical detachment. "They will send others, you know. Salazar doesn't forget." "Let them come," Mike said simply. "This is my town." As he looked into the eyes of the man who had haunted his past for 6 years, Mike felt something unexpected. Not satisfaction or vengeance, but resolution. A chapter closing. "What happens now, Sheriff?" Ramirez asked mockingly. "Now?" Mike stood, as sirens became audible in the distance. "Now you face justice, the American kind." Dawn was breaking as state police vehicles and FBI tactical teams rolled into Pine Creek. Mike met them on the steps of Town Hall, badge back on his chest, covered in rain and sweat, and the evidence of battle, but standing tall. Behind him, the farmer shadow of the seal receded. Not gone, never gone, but once again contained, controlled, a tool rather than a master. As he directed the FBI team to Ramirez, Mike caught sight of his deputies watching from across the street. Their expressions showed a new understanding, a new respect. They had seen who he truly was, and they were still there, still standing with him. For the first time since arriving in Pine Creek 3 years ago, Mike Colson felt something like peace. 3 days after the shootout, Pine Creek was still crawling with federal agents. The streets, that had once hosted only familiar faces, were now filled with tactical gear and government vehicles. Locals watched from windows and porches, whispering among themselves about the night their quiet town had become a war zone. Mike sat at his desk in the sheriff's station, finishing paperwork. The official report was a sanitized version of Evans. It mentioned nothing of his SEAL background or personal connection to Ramirez, just the facts. Cartel retribution, civilian casualty, coordinated law enforcement response. A knock at his door. Sarah Chen stood there, a fresh bandage on her arm where debris from the gunfight had caught her. "FBI's finishing up at Town Hall," she reported. "They're transferring Ramirez to a federal holding facility tonight." Mike nodded. "Good." Sarah closed the door behind her. "They've been asking questions about you, about how a small-town sheriff took down 4 cartel hitmen." "What? Did you tell them?" "That you're the best damn sheriff this county's ever had." She leaned against the wall. "But they're not buying it. Someone leaked your service record." Mike sighed. It had been inevitable. "Marshall warned me this might happen. Said to call him if it did." "Your old commander?" "He outranks most of the FBI agents here. Can help smooth things over." Mike gestured to the chair across from him. "But that's not why you're here." Sarah sat, studying him. "The mayor's called an emergency town meeting for tonight. People are scared, confused. They want answers. About Elena Vasquez's murder. About the gunfights. About who their sheriff really is," Sarah corrected gently. "Rumors are flying. Some saying you were CIA. Others that you were some kind of assassin." Mike almost laughed. "Small towns. They deserve something, boss. Some version of the truth." Mike knew she was right. He'd come to Pine Creek seeking anonymity, a place to bury his past. But that past had found him anyway, as it always did. Perhaps transparency, as much as possible, was the only path forward. "I'll be there," he promised. What about you? Holding. Up okay? Sarah flexed her injured arm. First time I've ever shot someone. Keep thinking about it. It gets easier, Mike said, then caught himself. Actually, it shouldn't. The day it gets easy is the day you need to turn in your badge. She nodded, understanding. And Rodrigo and Jesse? Administrative leave, same as you. Standard procedure after a shooting. Mike tapped his pen against the desk. They did good. You all did. We had a good teacher. Mike's phone rang, interrupting. Them. He checked the display. A Colorado area code. Colson, he answered, gesturing for Sarah to stay. Sheriff, this is Special Agent Diaz, FBI. We have a situation at the federal holding facility. Mike straightened. Ramirez. There was an incident during prisoner transport. Vehicle explosion, 3 agents down. Ramirez is in the wind. The pen in Mike's hand snapped. How long ago? 30 minutes. We have roadblocks on all major highways, but he won't use highways, Mike interrupted. Check forestry roads, old logging trails, and put protection on my deputies immediately. Already done. We're also securing the Vasquez girl. Mike's blood ran cold. What did you just say? A pause. The witness, Elena Vasquez's daughter. She's being moved to protective custody. Who told you about her? Mike demanded, already on his feet. It was in the federal briefing this morning. Standard protocol for... Mike ended the call, heart racing. Sarah, get Jesse and Rodrigo. Meet me at my cabin. Armed. What's happening? She asked, alarmed by his sudden urgency. Maria's location was compromised. Ramirez has friends in federal law enforcement. It's how the cartel's operated for years. He checked his sidearm. If they know where she is, they'll come for her. But your cabin's secure, right? Mike was already heading for the door. Against ordinary threats, yes. Not against Ramirez. Not if he's desperate. The drive to Sawyer Lake took 18 minutes at dangerous speeds. Mike's truck fishtailed on still wet roads as his mind raced through scenarios, each worse than the last. The satellite phone he'd left, with Maria, wasn't answering. He should have moved her immediately after capturing Ramirez. Should have known better than to trust federal protocols. Sloppiness born from exhaustion and the false sense of security that came with Ramirez's capture. His cabin came into view, seemingly undisturbed, but something felt wrong. The air was too still, the usual birds silent. Mike parked a quarter mile away, approaching through the woods that surrounded his property. Old instincts took over as he moved from cover to cover, scanning for threats. The cabin's front door was closed, windows intact, no signs of forced entry. But the side gate to the yard was slightly ajar, just an inch, but enough to know someone had passed through. Mike circled the perimeter, weapon drawn. At the back of the property, boot prints in the mud led toward the lake. Multiple sets. 3, maybe 4 people. He followed the tracks to the small dock where he sometimes fished. There, the prints ended abruptly. They'd used a boat, likely waiting, across the lake, watching the cabin. Professional, patient, exactly what he would have done. Mike's radio crackled softly. Sheriff, we're at your cabin. No sign of entry. Where are you? Sarah's voice wasted but controlled. South side, by the dock. They took her by boat. 3, maybe 4 men. Mike studied the distant shore. Have Rodrigo check the boathouse at Pine Creek Marina. See if anything's missing or if anyone saw a boat launch in the last hour. Copy that. Mike returned to the cabin, finding his deputies securing the perimeter. Inside, evidence of Maria's brief stay remained. A half-eaten sandwich, a blanket on the couch, on the kitchen counter. The satellite phone lay disassembled, battery removed. Smart girl, Mike murmured. She'd disabled the tracking. Any idea where they'd take her? Jesse asked. Mike considered. Somewhere isolated, defensible. He spread a county map across the table. Here, the old Blackwell Hunting Lodge. It's accessible by boat from the North Shore, but the approach by land is limited to a single road. Easily monitored. That's where Ramirez would go? Sarah asked. It's where I would go, Mike replied. Especially with limited manpower, choke points you can control, multiple escape routes, and enough distance from town that gunfire wouldn't be heard. His radio beeped. Sheriff, it's Rodrigo. Small boat was taken from the marina storage dock. Owner says it's been missing since this morning. Description: 16-foot aluminum fishing boat. Dark green, outboard motor. Mike nodded. It confirmed his theory. Meet us at the station. We need to gear up. Back at the department, Mike unlocked his private armory one more time. The FBI and state police were focused on highways and main roads. By the time he convinced them to redirect to the hunting lodge, it might be too late for Maria. This isn't just a rescue mission, he told his deputies as they prepared. Ramirez knows he can't escape Thiemann Hunt forever. He's using Maria as bait. For you, Sarah said, understanding. Yes, he wants to finish what started in Sinaloa. Mike checked a tactical vest. Which means I'm going in alone. Predictably, all three deputies protested simultaneously. Absolutely not. No way, Sheriff. We're coming with you. Mike held up a hand. Listen to me. Ramirez is expecting me to come charging in. That's his plan. But we're going to use that against him. He outlined his strategy, pointing to locations on a map of the hunting lodge. His deputies would establish a perimeter, covering escape routes and providing overwatch. Mike would approach alone, the bait Ramirez was expecting, but with his team already in position. Classic hammer and anvil, Sarah observed. He'll be so focused on you that he won't see us coming. Exactly. Mike looked each deputy in the eye. But this is strictly voluntary. These men are killers. If any of you want out, now's the time. None of them moved. Then gear up. We move in 30 minutes. As his team prepared, Mike stepped outside, for a moment alone. The adrenaline of the past days was wearing off, leaving bone-deep exhaustion. But he couldn't rest. Not yet. Not with Maria in danger because of him. He looked up at the clearing sky, remembering another mission years ago, another child caught in the crossfire. He hadn't been able to save that one. He wouldn't fail again. Sarah joined him outside. Thought you could use this. She handed him a fresh cup of coffee. Thanks. He took a sip. You know, in the teams, before a high-risk operation, we'd perform a ritual, write letters to loved ones, just in case. Do you have anyone to write to? She asked quietly. Mike shook his head. Not anymore. Family's gone. Friends from the service scattered to the wind. Pine Creek's the closest thing to home I've had in a long time. Then we make sure everyone comes back, Sarah said firmly. So you can keep calling it home. Mike nodded, grateful for her confidence even if he didn't fully share it. There's something you should know about Ramirez. Something not in any file. I'm listening. 6 years ago in Sinaloa, my team was tasked with supporting a DEA operation. Capture key cartel lieutenants, gather intelligence. Mike's gaze grew distant. It went bad. Someone inside our operation leaked details to the cartel. They were waiting for us. Sarah waited silently for him to continue. We lost 3 men that night. Good men. Mike's voice hardened. Ramirez personally executed one of them, Dave Martinez, my best friend. Made us watch via video feed while we were pinned down. Understanding dawned on Sarah's face. That's why it's personal. Yes. Mike finished his coffee. I had him in my sights that night, but he escaped during exfil. Been hunting our team ever since. 4 of us made it out, 2 are dead now, accidents that weren't accidents. And the 4th, Marshall, my CO. Too high profile to hit directly. Mike turned to her. The point is, Ramirez isn't just a cartel enforcer. He's a vendetta specialist. He doesn't just kill targets. He destroys everything they care about first. Like Elena. Like Maria. Sarah's expression hardened. Like Pine Creek. Exactly. So when we go in there, remember, he wants me broken before he kills me. The implications hung in the air between them. This wasn't just about saving Maria anymore. It was about stopping Ramirez from tearing apart everything Mike had built. Time. To go, Mike said finally. Let's bring her home. As they drove toward the hunting lodge, the sun began to set over the mountains. Mike watched the shadows lengthen across the landscape, remembering another sunset, another operation, half a world away. He'd been a different man then, a weapon aimed by his government. Now he was something else, a protector rather than just a warrior, a sheriff who had sworn to serve justice, not just deliver death. But as they approached the hunting grounds where Ramirez waited, Mike knew that both identities would be required to finish this. The badge and the trident, the lawman and the warrior, Sheriff Colson and Nighthawk. For Maria's sake, for Pine Creek's sake, he would need to be both. Last edited 3 minutes ago. Twilight cloaked the forest around Blackwell Hunting Lodge in deep shadows. Mike and his team had abandoned their vehicles a mile back, approaching on foot through dense woodland. They moved in silence, using hand signals Mike had taught them during training. Through his night vision monocular, Mike studied the lodge, a large timber structure on elevated ground. Windows dark except for faint light in what appeared to be the main room. 2 SUVs were parked near the front entrance. The stolen boat was tied at a small dock behind the property. 3 lookouts, Mike whispered into his radio. 1 on the roof, 2 patrolling the perimeter. More than we expected, Sarah replied from her position. Ramirez called in reinforcements. Mike counted 4 additional heat signatures inside the building. 7 total, plus Maria. Odds aren't great, Jesse commented. We've had worse, Mike said, though in truth, he was concerned. His deputies were capable, but this was beyond standard law enforcement operations. Stick to the plan. I move in first, draw attention. You secure the perimeter and move on my signal. Copy that. Mike distributed final assignments, then separated from the group. He circled wide around the property, using the terrain to mask his approach. Every step was measured, deliberate. The SEAL who had earned the call sign Nighthawk for his ability to move unseen in darkness was fully present now. He eliminated the first perimeter guard silently, a quick strike that rendered the man unconscious before he could raise an alarm. The second was more alert, but still fell without a sound, courtesy of Mike's specialized training. The rooftop lookout was more challenging. Mike considered his limited options, then decided on distraction. He used his knife to cut the power lines to the generator behind the lodge. Inside, lights flickered and died. Confused shouts erupted, followed by flashlight beams cutting through windows. Power's out, someone called in Spanish. Check the generator. Perfect. The rooftop lookout descended to investigate, positioning himself perfectly for Mike to strike. 3 down. 4 plus Ramirez to go. Mike approached the back entrance, listening carefully. Inside, he could hear movement, terse commands. One voice rose above the others. Ramirez, directing his men to secure the perimeter. He's coming, Ramirez told them. Be ready. Through a gap in the curtains, Mike caught a glimpse of Maria tied to a chair in the main room. She appeared unharmed but terrified. Ramirez stood nearby, a satellite phone in one hand, pistol in the other. Mike keyed his radio. All units in position. 3 confirmations came back immediately. Execute in 60 seconds. Mike checked his weapon one last time. Remember, Maria's safety is priority 1. He counted down silently, then moved. The back door splintered under his boot. Mike entered low, firing 2 quick shots that found their targets before the cartel men could react. He rolled behind a heavy table as return fire shredded the doorframe where he'd been standing. Outside, his deputies created their own points of entry, simultaneous breaches that divided the remaining gunmen's attention. Chaos erupted. Gunfire echoed through the lodge. Shouts in English and Spanish. The disciplined fire of law enforcement versus the wild spraying of criminals, suddenly finding themselves hunted. Mike moved through the gunfight with cold precision, advancing steadily toward the main room where Maria was held. 2 more cartel men fell before his methodical fire. But Ramirez was nowhere to be seen. Maria! Mike called, reaching the girl. Are you hurt? She shook her head, eyes wide with fear. As Mike cut her restraints, a 6th sense warned him. He spun, raising his weapon just as Ramirez emerged from a side room. Drop it, Chief, Ramirez ordered, his gun aimed not at Mike but at Maria. Mike froze, weapon half raised. Across the room, he could see Sarah advancing, her own weapon trained on Ramirez. It's over, Mike said calmly. Your men are dead or captured. FBI is inbound. Ramirez smiled coldly. Yet here we are. Again, you and me. A weapon between us. His finger tightened on the trigger. Only this time I have the advantage. This isn't Sinaloa, Mike replied. You're not walking away. Neither is she. Ramirez's aim remained steady on Maria. Unless you put down your weapon. Now. Time seemed to slow. Mike calculated angles, probabilities. The shot was risky, too risky with Maria's life in the balance. He lowered his gun. Slide it over. Ramirez commanded. Mike complied, pushing his weapon across the floor. Ramirez's smile widened. The mighty Nighthawk. surrendering to save a child he barely knows. He shook his head. Your weakness was always your conscience. And yours was always underestimating me, Mike replied evenly. A flicker of doubt crossed Ramirez's face, just for an instant. It was enough. Mike exploded into motion, pushing Maria aside as he charged forward. Ramirez fired twice, both shots missing their targets as Mike closed the distance. The impact drove both men through a glass door onto the lodge's back porch. Mike's shoulder blazed with pain. One of Ramirez's bullets had found its mark after all, but adrenaline pushed the injury aside as he grappled with his longtime enemy. Ramirez was strong, skilled in hand-to-hand combat. He landed a vicious blow to Mike's wounded shoulder, drawing a grunt of pain. I've waited years for this, Ramirez snarled, driving a knee into Mike's ribs. To finish what should have ended in Mexico, Mike retaliated with an elbow strike that connected solidly with Ramirez's jaw. That operation was just business, he gasped, blocking another attack. Why make it personal? Because you took everything from me. Ramirez's eyes blazed with hatred. My position, my reputation. The cartel blamed me for the failure, made me fight my way back up for years. They separated momentarily, circling each other on the rain-slick porch. Inside, Mike could hear his deputies securing the lodge, Maria's voice among them. She was safe. Mission accomplished. Now it was just him and Ramirez, the past and the present colliding. You killed Dave Martinez, Mike said, voice hardening. Made us watch while he begged for his life. He deserved worse, Ramirez spat. All of you did. Ramirez lunged forward, a knife suddenly in his hand, hidden in his boot, a contingency Mike should have anticipated. The blade slashed across Mike's forearm as he deflected the attack. Blood flowed freely now from multiple wounds. Mike's strength was fading, his movements slowing. Ramirez pressed his advantage, driving Mike back toward the edge of the porch, where a 15-foot drop awaited. Your deputies will be next, Ramirez promised, blade flashing in the moonlight. Then the girl, then everyone in your pathetic town, one by one. Something snapped inside Mike. Not rage, something colder, more focused. The part of him that had made him one of the Navy's most effective operators resurfaced completely. He stopped retreating, planted his feet, met Ramirez's next attack, not with defense, but with controlled aggression. The knife clattered away as Mike broke Ramirez's wrist with a precise strike. A follow-up blow to the solar plexus drove the air from the cartel man's lungs. A sweep took his legs from under him. Ramirez fell hard, stunned by the sudden reversal. Mike stood over him, blood dripping from his wounds, eyes cold. For Dave, Mike said quietly, delivering a strike that rendered Ramirez unconscious. When Sarah and the others burst onto the porch seconds later, they found Mike securing zip ties around Ramirez's wrists. Sheriff! Sarah rushed forward, alarmed by the blood. You're hit! I'm fine, Mike assured her, though his complexion betrayed otherwise. Maria? Safe. Jesse's got her. And the others? 2 survivors in custody. The rest didn't make it. Mike nodded, fighting to stay upright as blood loss and exhaustion took their toll. Good work, deputy. Sarah caught him as his knees buckled. Rodrigo, get the first aid kit. Sheriff's down! As darkness crept at the edges of his vision, Mike looked past Sarah to where Ramirez lay unconscious. The Amon who had haunted him for 6 years was finally, truly captured. The ghosts of Sinaloa could rest now. Dave, Mike whispered, as consciousness slipped away. It's done, brother. It's finally done. The last thing he heard was Sarah calling his name, her voice growing distant as blackness claimed him completely. Fluorescent lights, antiseptic smell, rhythmic beeping. Mike Colson clawed his way back to consciousness through layers of medication-induced fog. The county hospital room gradually came into focus. White walls, medical equipment, and Sarah Chen dozing in a chair by the window. He tried to speak, but his throat was dessert dry. The slight movement was enough to wake Sarah, her hand immediately, going to her weapon before recognizing he was awake. Sheriff, she said, relief flooding her face. About time. Maria? His voice was a rasp. Safe. Federal marshals have her. Sarah poured water from a plastic pitcher. 3 days, boss. You've been out for 3 days. Mike struggled to sit up, wincing as pain shot through his shoulder. Ramirez, Federal Supermax in Colorado. No chance of escape this time. She helped him drink. 2 gunshot wounds, knife wound, 3 broken ribs, and severe blood loss. Doctor said you're either the toughest man he's ever treated, or the luckiest. Don't feel like either right now. Mike noticed his bandaged shoulder. Others? Jesse got grazed, nothing serious. Everyone else is fine. Sarah's expression sobered. But there's something you should know. While you were unconscious, some people came to visit. Military types. They weren't happy about Ramirez. Mike tensed. What did they want? They wouldn't say exactly. Asked a lot of questions about the operation in Sinaloa. She leaned closer. One of them, tall guy, scar over his right eye, said to tell you Protocol Sierra is in effect. Said you'd understand. The water cup nearly slipped from Mike's fingers. Protocol Sierra, a containment procedure for compromised intelligence. Someone high up was worried about what Ramirez might reveal in custody. When did they leave? Yesterday, but they're still in town, staying at the motel on Route 12. Mike threw back the covers, ignoring the pain that radiated through his body. I need clothes. Whoa, Sarah protested. You're in no shape to… Protocol Sierra means national security, Sarah. It means what happened in Sinaloa wasn't just a DEA operation. Mike met her eyes. It means someone's trying to bury the truth, and probably anyone who knows it. Understanding dawned on her face. Including you. Including all of us. Mike tried to stand, grimacing as his legs threatened to give way. Ramirez wasn't just a cartel enforcer. He was an asset, CIA or defense intelligence. The operation in Sinaloa went bad because someone needed it too. Sarah steadied him. Why are you only telling me this now? Because I didn't know until Ramirez escaped the first time. No cartel soldier gets away from federal custody without inside help. Mike leaned against the bed. I need to get to my cabin. There's evidence there. Insurance I kept from Sinaloa. Names, dates, coordinates. Sarah looked torn between duty and loyalty. You realize what you're suggesting? That our own government, not the government, individuals within it, people who profit from the cartels. Mike's eyes were hard. The same, people who sent those men to visit me. After a moment's consideration, Sarah nodded. I'll get you clothes and a car. Just you. Don't involve Jesse or Rodrigo yet. Plausible deniability. 20 minutes later, they slipped out through a service entrance. Mike's body protested every movement, but determination pushed the pain aside. The drive to his cabin was tense, both scanning constantly for surveillance. When did this become my life? Sarah wondered aloud. I left Dallas PD to escape this kind of thing. The thing about running from your past, Mike said, is that it always catches up eventually. His cabin appeared undisturbed, but Mike approached cautiously. Stay here. Watch the road. Inside, everything was as he'd left it. Mike went directly to the hidden panel behind his closet, unlocking it with practiced movements. The metal box, containing his Sinaloa evidence, was still there, untouched. He opened it carefully. Inside lay a data drive, photographs, and a handwritten journal documenting everything he'd discovered about the operation's true purpose. It hadn't been about capturing cartel leaders. It had been about eliminating one faction to benefit another, an American-backed faction with ties to certain intelligence officials. Dave Martinez had discovered this mid-operation. He'd been executed not by Ramirez, but on orders from someone within their own chain of command. Ramirez had merely been the instrument. Mike secured the evidence in a waterproof pouch, then rejoined Sarah outside. We need to move, he said. They'll have monitored my discharge from the hospital. Where to? Marshall, my old CO. He's the only one I trust with this. Sarah's phone chimed with a text message. Her expression darkened as she read it. Jesse just reported men in suits at the station, asking questions about the hunting lodge operation, showing federal credentials. It's starting, Mike said grimly. How many deputies on duty? Just Jesse and Blake. Rodrigo's on paternity leave. His wife had the baby yesterday. Tell Jesse to cooperate fully. Don't mention anything about Sinaloa or my military background. Mike considered their options. We need to get to Marshall, but they'll be watching airports, bus stations. Sarah started the car. What about Mayor Wilson? He has connections in the state government. Too risky. We don't know who's compromised. Mike winced as the car hit a pothole. Head for the old mining road that crosses into Nevada. It's rarely patrolled. As they drove, Mike filled Sarah in on the full truth, how the Sinaloa operation had been compromised from the beginning, how he and Marshall had gathered evidence, planning to blow the whistle when their team was ambushed, how Dave and the others had died to keep the secret. So Ramirez wasn't just seeking revenge, Sarah realized. He was cleaning up loose ends for someone else. Exactly. But he went off script in Pine Creek. Made it too public. Now they're scrambling to contain the situation. Sarah processed this. And containment means eliminating witnesses, creating a cover story. Mike checked his weapon, the backup he kept at the cabin, making sure the truth stays buried. At the edge of town, Sarah suddenly braked hard. Roadblock. 4 black SUVs formed a barrier across the road. Men in tactical gear stood ready, weapons visible but not yet raised. Federal checkpoint, Sarah observed. Looking for someone. Us, Mike confirmed. Turn around, slowly. Sarah executed a careful 3-point turn. As they drove away, one of the SUVs pulled out to follow. They're on us, she reported tensely. Take the next right, then left at the gas station. Sarah followed his directions, weaving through Pine Creek's back streets. The SUV stayed with them, gradually closing the distance. What now? We can't outrun them. Mike considered their dwindling options. The evidence in his possession was their only leverage, and their greatest danger. If it fell into the wrong hands, they were dead. If they destroyed it, they had nothing to bargain with. The lumber mill, he decided. It's defensible, with multiple exit routes. Sarah accelerated, taking a sharp turn that momentarily shook their pursuer. And then what? I make contact with Marshall. He has resources we don't. At the abandoned mill, they parked behind a rusted equipment shed, out of sight from the main road. Mike's wounds throbbed with renewed intensity as they moved quickly into the building. They'll have thermal imaging, Mike warned. We need to mask our signatures. The mill's basement level offered what they needed. Thick concrete walls that would block most scanning technologies. They positioned themselves near a service tunnel that could serve as an emergency exit. Those men, Sarah said quietly. They're not Cartel. They're our own people. Some of them, Mike corrected. Not all. Not the ones who remember their oath. He used a secure satellite phone, another relic from his SEAL days, to send a coded message to Marshall. 3 minutes later, it beeped with a response. He's sending a team, Mike reported. 4 hours out. Can we last that long? Mike checked his weapon. We have to. Outside, vehicles approached, multiple engines growing louder. Their pursuers had found them. Sarah drew her service weapon. Just like the training drills, right? Just like the drills, Mike agreed, though both knew this was different. These weren't Cartel soldiers. These were trained government operators with advanced equipment and tactics, a voice called out through a bullhorn. Sheriff Colson, deputy. Chen, this is a federal security team. We need you to surrender any classified materials and come with us for debriefing. Mike and Sarah exchanged glances. The phrasing confirmed everything. They knew exactly what Mike had. My testimony for your safety, the voice continued. That's the offer. One time only. They're lying, Sarah whispered. Of course they are. Mike checked his watch. 3 hours and 45 minutes until Marshall's team arrived. We need to hold out. The first flashbang crashed through her upper window, detonating with a disorienting blast. The assault had begun. Mike positioned himself at the basement stairs, creating a choke point that would force attackers to come at them one by one. Sarah took cover behind a concrete pillar, her weapon trained on the entrance. Remember, Mike said, calmly, these are American operators. They may be on the wrong side, but they're still operating under rules of engagement. They want the evidence more than they want us dead. That's supposed to be comforting. It means they'll hesitate. We won't. The first operator appeared at the top of the stairs, tactical gear identifying him as a professional. Mike issued a clear warning. Federal officers under duress, stand down. The man hesitated, just as Mike had predicted. It was enough. Sarah's shot struck him in the shoulder of his body armor, the impact knocking him backward into his teammates. Confusion erupted above as they realized the targets were not going quietly. Second team will be flanking, Mike warned. Watch the service tunnel. As if on cue, movement came from the tunnel entrance. Mike fired twice, precise shots that struck body armor but halted the advance. For the next 20 minutes, a tense standoff developed. The operators probed their defenses with minimal force, confirming Mike's assessment that they wanted the evidence intact. Each attempt was met with carefully placed fire that wounded but didn't kill. "Sheriff Colson," the voice called again. "Your former teammate David Martinez died because he couldn't accept the bigger picture. Don't make his mistake." The words struck like physical blows, using Dave's name, confirming everything Mike had suspected about his friend's death. "You hear that, Sarah?" Mike's voice was ice. "The bigger picture. That's what they call it when they sell out their country." Sarah's expression hardened. "How much longer?" 3 hours. "We just need to hold." But even as he said it, Mike recognized the reality of their situation. His wounds were sapping his strength, they had limited ammunition, and they were facing an enemy with seemingly unlimited resources. The next assault came from multiple directions simultaneously, a coordinated push designed to overwhelm their defenses. Mike and Sarah fought back desperately, but the attackers were gaining ground. "Fall back," Mike ordered, as bullets chipped away at their cover. "Service tunnel." They retreated deeper into the basement, Mike providing covering fire as Sarah moved ahead. Blood had soaked through his bandages, his body running on pure adrenaline and determination. At the tunnel entrance, Sarah suddenly stopped. "Mike!" He turned to find the tunnel blocked by debris, deliberate sabotage by their attackers. Their escape route was cut off. Pinned down, outgunned, and with no way out, Mike made a decision. He handed the evidence pouch to Sarah. "There's another way," he told her, pointing to a narrow drainage pipe, barely visible behind a stack of rotting lumber. "It leads to the creek bed. You can make it through." Sarah shook her head. "I'm not leaving you." "You have to. The evidence is what matters." Mike's eyes locked with hers. "Dave died for this truth. I won't let it die with us." "They'll kill you," she protested. "Maybe. Maybe not." Mike checked his remaining ammunition. "But I can buy you time. Marshall's team will find you at the rendezvous." "Point!" Sarah hesitated, torn between duty and loyalty. Finally, she reached out, squeezing his arm. "For what it's worth, you're the best damn sheriff, and the best damn SEAL I've ever known." High praise from Dallas PD, Mike managed a grim smile. "Now go." As Sarah disappeared into the drainage pipe, Mike positioned himself for his last stand. The approaching footsteps grew louder. He thought of Pine Creek, of his deputies, of the quiet life he'd built, worth defending, worth dying for, if necessary. The first operator appeared at the entrance to their position. Mike raised his weapon, ready to make each remaining bullet count. Whatever happened next, the truth about Sinaloa would finally come to light. Dave would have justice. That was enough. Sheriff Mike Colson took aim and waited for his enemies to come. Gunfire echoed through the lumber mill as Mike held his position. 3 operators had pushed into the basement, and 3 had fallen back, wounded but alive. Mike's ammunition was nearly spent, his strength fading with each exchange. "Colson!" called a new voice, familiar, authoritative. "Stand down! That's an order!" Mike tensed. Commander Anderson, his former superior from Naval Special Warfare Command, a man he'd once respected. "Little late for orders, Commander," Mike called back. "Especially from someone who betrayed his oath." "You don't understand the bigger picture," Anderson replied. "What we did in Sinaloa was authorized at the highest levels. Selling out American operatives, executing Dave Martinez." Mike's voice hardened. "That wasn't in any briefing I received." A pause. "Martinez discovered something he shouldn't have, made the wrong choice. And now I've made the same choice," Mike said. Funny how history repeats itself. Minutes stretched into an hour. Mike's vision blurred from blood loss and exhaustion, but he maintained his guard. Every minute he held out was another minute for Sarah to escape with the evidence. The radio at his side crackled suddenly. "Nighthawk, this is Ghost Actual. Do you copy? Marshall, his old commander." "Copy," Mike responded, hope surging. "Status? Inbound with QRF. 10 minutes out. Hang tight." Anderson's voice came again, urgent now. "Last chance, Colson. Surrender the evidence. Walk away alive." Mike allowed himself a grim smile. "You should have killed me in Sinaloa when you had the chance, Commander." Outside, the sound of approaching helicopters cut through the night. The quick reaction force arrived with overwhelming firepower. Marshall's team, former special operators loyal to him, secured the lumber mill within minutes, capturing Anderson and his men. Mike was evacuated by helicopter, drifting in and out of consciousness. He awoke in a private medical facility, Marshall. At his bedside, Sarah? Mike asked immediately. Safe. The evidence too. Marshall's weathered face showed relief. You did good, Chief. Anderson. In custody, along with his team. But this goes higher than him. Marshall's expression darkened. We're looking at a joint CIA-DIA operation that went rogue years ago, using cartel connections to fund black projects, eliminating anyone who got too close. Mike absorbed this. Ramirez? Just a pawn, useful to both sides. Marshall checked his watch. We're moving you to a secure location. There are still people out there who want this buried. No, Mike struggled to sit up. Pine Creek, my deputies, they're at risk. Already handled. Federal marshals have secured them. Mike stared out the window at the unfamiliar landscape. What happens now? Justice, Marshall said simply. For Dave. For everyone who died keeping this secret. 3 days later, Mike was strong enough to be transported. Not back to Pine Creek, but to Washington, D.C., where a closed Senate Intelligence Committee hearing awaited. Sarah met him at Andrews Air Force Base, her familiar face a welcome sight amidst the chaos. They've been questioning me for days, she told him as they rode in a secure convoy. I've told them everything about Ramirez, the operation, Pine Creek. They believe you? The evidence was compelling, especially combined with Marshall's testimony. She studied him with concern. You ready for this? Mike looked out at the Washington Monument passing in the distance. I've spent years trying to leave that part of me behind. The SEAL, the operator. Now I have to resurrect him one last time. For Dave, Sarah reminded him. For all of them. At the secure hearing, Mike faced a panel of senators, senior military officers, and intelligence officials. Some looked hostile, others surprised, a few sympathetic. His testimony was direct, unflinching. The Sinaloa operation, Dave's discovery, the ambush, the years in hiding, Ramirez's arrival in Pine Creek, the conspiracy that had cost so many lives. And you have proof of these allegations? Asked Senator Harrison, the committee chair. Yes, sir. Documents, recordings, operational details that only someone involved would know. Mike met his gaze steadily. Dave Martinez didn't die because he was captured by cartel members. He died because he discovered American officials were profiting from those same cartels. A murmur ran through the room. These are serious accusations, Sheriff Colson, said a stern-faced CIA official. They're not accusations, Mike corrected. They're facts. Facts that have gotten good men killed. The hearing continued for hours, with Mike answering questions calmly but firmly. When it finally concluded, Marshall was waiting outside. Well? Mike asked. Mixed reactions. Some want this buried deeper. Others want heads to roll. Marshall looked grim. But the evidence is too strong to ignore completely. What about Anderson? Singing like a canary to save himself. Naming names. Marshall checked his secure phone. Including Director Weber at DIA and 3 senior CIA officials. Mike absorbed this. Any blowback toward Pine Creek? That's complicated. Marshall hesitated. Your cover there is blown wide open. Everyone knows who you are now. Your deputies have been questioned extensively. Mike's heart sank. The quiet life he'd built, the peace he'd found. Gone. There's more, Marshall continued. Cartel activity has increased along the border. Retaliation for Ramirez's capture. They've specifically named Pine Creek as a target. Then I need to get back there. Marshall shook his head. Not yet. You're still a key witness. And a target. Those are my people, Marshall. I know. And we're protecting them. Marshall placed a hand on Mike's shoulder. But the best thing you can do for them right now is finish this. Cut off the head of the snake. The final confrontation came not in a gunfight, but in a secure government facility deep beneath Washington. Director Weber, the highest-ranking official implicated in the conspiracy, had requested to speak with Mike alone. Against the advice of Marshall and the federal prosecutors, Mike agreed. Weber was tall, distinguished, with the confident bearing of a man accustomed to power. The detention cell did little to diminish his presence. Sheriff Colson, he greeted, as if they were meeting at a cocktail party. Or should I say Chief Petty Officer? Either works, Mike replied coolly. What do you want, Director? To explain something you seem unable to grasp. Weber gestured to the chair across from him. The world isn't black and white, Chief. Sometimes, maintaining American interests requires compromises. Compromises like executing your own men? Mike remained standing. Betraying your oath. Weber's expression hardened. You have no idea what threats we face, what we've prevented. The cartels were a necessary evil, controlled, contained, used to fund operations Congress would never approve. Tell that to the families buried in cartel mass graves, Mike countered. Tell that to Dave Martinez's mother. Collateral damage, Weber said dismissively. Part of a larger strategy you can't comprehend. Mike studied the man before him, powerful, intelligent, utterly convinced of his own righteousness. The most dangerous kind of enemy. You know what I've realized, Director? Mike said quietly. Men like you are no different from the cartel lords. You claim to control. You traffic in death. You sacrifice others while remaining safe yourself. You convince yourself it's for some greater good. Weber's face flushed with anger. You self-righteous. The difference is, Mike continued, they're honest about what they are. You hide behind flags and oaths you never intended to honor. Mike turned to leave, then paused at the door. You won't see the outside of a prison cell again, Director. That's not justice for everyone you've killed. But it's a start. Weber's voice followed him, cold with threat. You think this ends with me? There are others, systems in place. You'll never be safe. Pine Creek will never be safe. Mike looked back one last time. That sounds like a threat, Director. A promise. Then let me make one in return, Mike said evenly. If anything happens to my town or my people, I'll be back. And next time, I won't be wearing a badge. The door closed on Weber's stunned face. Outside, Marshall waited. Got what you needed? Yes, Mike nodded. A confession. And clarity. About? What I need to do next. 1 month later, Mike Colson drove the familiar road into Pine Creek. The town looked unchanged. Same storefronts, same courthouse, same quiet streets, but he knew appearances were deceiving. Nothing was the same, least of all him. At the sheriff's station, his deputies waited, Sarah, Jesse, Rodrigo. They stood as he entered, a mixture of emotions on their faces. Sheriff? Sarah greeted him. The simple word carried weight, acknowledgement of his return, his role, his choice. Deputies, Mike replied. Situation report? The normalcy of the request broke the tension. Jesse laughed. Straight to business, huh? No. How's it going after saving the country? Mike allowed himself a small smile. Town first, country second. Town's quiet, Rodrigo reported. The federal presence has discouraged any cartel activity, for now. And the people? Confused, Sarah admitted. Scared at first, now mostly curious. They have questions. I'll bet they do. Mike hung his hat on the familiar hook. Town meeting tonight. Already scheduled, Sarah confirmed. Full disclosure. Mike considered this. The classified details would remain secret, but his identity, his past, those were already known. As much as I can give them, he decided. They deserve that much. That evening, Pine Creek's town hall was packed. Mayor Wilson opened the proceedings, then turned the floor over to Mike. Most of you have heard rumors, Mike began, facing his community. Some true, some not. I'd like to set their record straight. For the next hour, he shared his story, his service as a SEAL, his decision to become a sheriff, the events that brought cartel violence to their doorstep. He explained the conspiracy, the cover-up, and the final resolution in Washington. When he finished, the room was silent. Then Mayor Wilson stood. The question before us, he said, is whether Sheriff Colson should continue in his position, given these extraordinary circumstances. Mike held his breath. He'd prepared himself for rejection, for the end of his time in Pine Creek. It would be understandable. He'd brought danger to their doors, hidden his true identity, involved the town in a national security crisis. Mayor Wilson continued. I've taken the liberty of polling the town council privately. He paused, looking around the room. And we unanimously agree that Pine Creek has never had a finer sheriff. If he'll have us, we'd like him to stay. A cheer erupted, growing as more townspeople joined in. Mike stood stunned as his neighbors, people he'd protected, served, and ultimately risked everything for, showed their support. Sarah leaned close. told you they'd understand. Later, as the meeting dispersed, Maria Vasquez approached him. The girl who had lost everything to the cartel, now living with her aunt in town. "Sheriff," she said solemnly, "is it really over?" Mike knelt to her level. "The immediate danger is over. The men who hurt your mother are facing justice. But there will be others," she said perceptively. "Won't there?" Mike couldn't lie to her. "Yes, there might be." Maria nodded, accepting this hard truth. "Then we'll be ready." "We will," Mike agreed, surprised by her resilience. 6 months later, Mike sat on his dock at Sawyer Lake, watching the sunset. The water was peaceful, reflecting oranges and purples as day surrendered to night. Sarah joined him, 2 coffee cups in hand. Their relationship had evolved since Washington, colleagues becoming friends, possibly something more. Time would tell. "Penny, for your thoughts, Sheriff?" she asked, handing him a steaming cup. "Just thinking about choices," Mike replied. "The ones that lead us places we never expected." Regrets? He considered this. About leaving the teams? About coming to Pine Creek? No. Even with everything that happened. Maybe especially because of that. Mike sipped his coffee. "I spent years trying to bury part of myself, pretending the seal never existed. Then Ramirez came, and I had to be both, the sheriff and the warrior." "And now?" Sarah asked. "Now I understand they were never separate. Just different aspects of the same duty." Mike looked out over the water. To protect, to serve, to stand between innocent people and those who would harm them. In town, Pine Creek was preparing for its annual summer festival. Life had returned to normal, or a new normal. The FBI maintained a small presence, and security had been enhanced around the county. But the fear had faded. "There will be others," Mike acknowledged. Weber wasn't wrong about that. The cartels have long memories. "So do SEALs," Sarah pointed out. "So do sheriffs," Mike nodded. "And we'll be ready, not just me this time, all of us." He thought about Dave Martinez, about Elena Vasquez, about all. Those who had paid the price for corruption and greed. Their ghosts would always be with him. But now they drove him forward rather than holding him back. The trident and the badge, the warrior and the protector, no longer at war within him, but working in harmony. As darkness fell over Pine Creek, Sheriff Mike Colson watched over his town, a guardian in the shadows, finally at peace with all the parts of himself, ready for whatever came next.